Hello, you beautiful people, Aaron here, back with another video. Earlier on in this patch, I put out a post asking y'all if you wanted to see anything specifically from me, and though I didn't receive many requests, I did receive some that caught my eye. This is one of them. Today, we're going to be discussing Baizhu in Nilou teams, specifically against Yaoyao, and who's better. I'll be going very in-depth into this, more in-depth than I do in my normal analyses videos, because those encompass a lot of different information, and this is just one single topic. I could honestly make an hour-long guide video for every single character, but that would take too much time and effort, and I don't want to do that. But before we hop into the topic at hand, I just want to say that if you like my content, why not take a bite out of that Twin Dragon Almond Cookie-flavored subscribe button down below. And with that out of the way, let's hop right into it. First, let's quickly go over what each character provides. Baizhu offers slow and single-target dendro application, he offers some great healing and some okay shielding, and he offers a pretty strong buff to dendro reactions that can have almost a permanent uptime on less than 3 characters. Yaoyao provides better dendro application, a great amount of single target and team-wide healing, and a dendro damage percent buff at C1. One major difference between these two is their buffing potential, as Baizhu is able to increase the team's damage with his dendro reaction buff, while Yaoyao is able to wield the Deepwood set, which Baizhu struggles to utilize effectively due to his low skill and burst uptime and AoE. However, the most important difference between the two is their elemental application. In terms of Nilou teams, which is the main topic of this video, elemental application, especially the AoE and how persistent it is, matters the most over anything else. This is Baiju's main fault, as his dendro application's AoE is lackluster, it's slow, and it only goes for the target closest to the active party member. On the other hand, Yaoyao's application is 2.5 times faster than Baiju's in AoE, or slightly slower in single target. I know, this sounds really weird, but it's mainly because she has an ICD of 2.5 seconds with no hit number. She also happens to have a better targeting mechanism that is random, which is perfect for AoE. This leads to a dendro application of once every second in AoE, but once every 3 seconds in single target. This means that while Yaoyao's application is significantly better in AoE, Baiju's dendro application is 20% faster when against a single enemy. However, Nilou teams excel mainly in AoE and not single target. This means that Yaoyao being better in AoE is so much more significant to the team's performance than Baizhu being better in single target. But there is another reason as to why Yaoyao is better, and that's because of the Deepwood Memories artifact set. This artifact set is so important to every comp that runs dendro as its main source of damage that if you don't use it, you're losing out on a masterful crap ton of damage. Since Yaoyao deals elemental skill damage once every second with a randomized targeter, she can easily apply the passive effects Resistance Shred to all enemies in all sorts of situations. Baizhu does not have this luxury, as his damage is single target, it's much slower, and you'd have to position yourself to apply Deepwood Memories to the correct target. So what does this mean for Baizhu? Does this mean that he cannot work well in Nilou teams? Well, somewhat, but not entirely. It just means that he cannot be the primary dendro unit in the team. Instead, he'd act as the secondary dendro character, since he would rely on the other dendro character to do the heavy lifting. But what characters would these be? Well, it depends a lot on team composition and your other character's application. This matters a lot due to the amount of blooms you're able to produce, relying on which element is applied first. For those that don't know, applying dendro to hydro will produce 1 bloom seed and will completely remove the hydro aura, while applying hydro to dendro will produce 1 seed but will keep the dendro aura up on the target. This means that another bloom seed can be produced from having the dendro aura up on targets rather than a hydro aura. Therefore, it's much more valuable to have slower, weaker hydro application and faster, stronger dendro application. Since Nilou teams excel in AoE, both of these elemental applications should primarily focus on being AoE. There are some situations where you don't need to focus on this though, especially when you have Nahida, who has copious amounts of dendro application, or if in more single target scenarios, where Yolan and Xingqiu can be very strong options. However, still focusing on keeping the dendro aura up on targets will lead to the largest DPS, and it will also force your hydro units to be the primary activators of the bloom reactions. In most cases, the strongest Nilou team options are those that have larger AoEs, as they're able to apply their element in a large area in order to proc the most amount of bountiful cores. You can see this in Kokomi and Nahida, both of which have some of the largest AoEs in their respective elements. Their best substitutes are closest to them, those of which being Kaveh, Alhaitham, Candace, and Ayato. However, since Nilou teams want to keep the dendro aura up, a character like Tartaglia will usually not help in these team comps due to his absurd amount of hydro in a large AoE, which would lead to less bountiful cores. This matters a lot, as the more hydro application a character has, the worse off they are in Nilou teams, which also means that the opposite is true for dendro. This is why Kaveh, Kale, and Alhaitham are all pretty good substitutes for Nahida, and why Candace and Barbara are good substitutes for Kokomi. But what about Yaoyao? She is towards the opposite end, so why did she work? Well, mostly comes down to her ability to keep the dendro aura up on multiple targets. Her application is much faster on multiple enemies, which matters a lot, and since other units have larger forms of AoE dendro application, she is mostly there to help them keep the dendro aura up, as well as provide the Deepwood Memory's passive effect. On the other hand, Baizhu cannot keep the dendro aura up on targets unless he's on field. However, using him on field would be detrimental to the team's damage, since he would have to steal his own buff from his teammates who actually need it. And another note, since his buff goes to the active character, using a dendro driver to keep the dendro aura on targets would result in Baiju's buff also going to the wrong character. This is all in tandem with the fact that Yaoyao can reliably use the Deepwood Memory set to boost the damage of team by a larger amount than Baiju's buff would without the artifact set. So what's up with Baizhu in Nilou teams? Can he actually work here, or would he just be a loss in damage? Well, yes, he can actually work here, but on one condition. There's one single character that helps mitigate all of Baiju's issues and allows him to thrive as the best support for Nilou teams. Nahida is and always will be Baiju's biggest crutch in Bloom-related team comps, and this one is no exception. Nahida's huge AoE elemental application, as well as absurdly strong elemental application, which allows for more blooms than usual to be produced, lets her run the Deepwood set instead of Baizhu. Nahida also isn't forced into a driver role in the team, which also allows for Baiju's buff to be passed to the more important members who will be the ones rocking the Bountiful Core reaction. There's also the benefit that Baizhu applies dendro occasionally from off-field, which would help keep Nahida's major dendro application up in case it is ever obliterated by Hydro. While other characters like Yaoyao and Kaveh can also do this, they don't come with the benefit of providing certain characters with a major Bountiful Core damage increase. Nahida also provides elemental mastery to the person on field, which will make the buff that Baizhu grants him stronger. On top of this, the benefit of Baizhu being on the team also reduces the need for another healer like Kokomi or Barbara. While this does sound like you would want to get rid of them, that case only pertains to Barbara, as Kokomi still has the widest AoE Hydro application for proccing Bountiful Cores, as well as an innate Hydro infusion allowing her to work as a fantastic driver while only building elemental mastery. The amount of synergy that Baizhu has with the best Bountiful Core team in the game is actually nutty. The issue with him is when you start taking away the best units for Nilou teams, which then reduces Baiju's usefulness in those teams tremendously. This is because these two characters' next best thing are not good enough to make Baizhu work. For Kokomi, the next best unit is a C6 Candace, who needs a lot of energy recharge in order to make her work. This heavily limits the elemental mastery she could build, which makes Baizhu less of an upgrade to the team than just getting Kokomi. And there's Nahida's next best thing, which is Kaveh, whose benefit to the team is from front-loading a crap ton of dendro application. Afterward, the only dendro application would come from Baizhu. This is Baiju's biggest issue in Nilou teams. He offers a crazy good buff that increases his team's damage by quite a good amount, but if you don't have all the best options for Nilou, then his value plummets dramatically. Despite this topic being specifically on Baizhu and Yaoyao, I feel like I need to mention one more character due to their similarities. This unit does a similar job to that of Baizhu, but has the benefit of working better in less than ideal situations. Kaveh is another character that offers a very strong buff to Bloom-related reactions, but this time only when considering rupture damage, which Bountiful Cores just so happen to deal. While Kaveh's buff is less, it can be applied to the whole team with ease, as long as he is on field. He also has the benefit of having large AoEs and relatively fast dendro application too. This allows him to excel as a Nilou team driver in case Baizhu cannot be used. While he may not have as strong of a buff when focusing on a single character to proc Bountiful Cores, his buff is better when focusing on the team. Not only that, he also helps serve as a stat stick to the rest of the team, as he could wield Favoni's Greatsword and the Instructor set, which will help buff his other units even if they are stat hungry like Candace. Kaveh also has pretty strong self-sustain while only building elemental mastery, which lessens the need for healing in the team as well as amplifies his own damage whenever he triggers a Bountiful Core. Kaveh has a lot going on for him in compositions where the trigger for Bountiful Cores is not consolidated in 1 or 2 units. In these spots, Kaveh does outperform Baizhu in team damage output due to the utility he provides. But then we get to the main question of the video. Between Yaoyao, Baizhu, and now Kaveh, because I forced him in here, who works better in Nilou teams? Well, it really depends. Yaoyao is by far the best blanket pick. Her AoE, dendro application, healing ability, traffic potential, synergy with Candace, ability to run Deepwood, and her overall versatility is through the roof. She's by far the best option for more free-to-play accounts, and also in most of their situations, as she works well both on and off field. She even has some synergy with Baizhu, as when paired with Candace, Yaoyao will be pretty much the only one proccing the Bountiful Cores, so her being the only one to get Baiju's buff is not that much of a detriment. However, the issue with this is the lack of major dendro AoE, which is exactly where Kaveh would fit into the mix. Kaveh would work best here only when other keystones the team are unlocked, like Yaoyao, Kokomi, C6 Candace, and Nahida, as just some examples. Kaveh can definitely have trouble keeping the dendro aura up on on his own, especially with Kokomi or C6 Candace, but he does excel at allowing everyone on the team to deal more bountiful core damage. In total, Kaveh will prove to be a bountiful core damage increase of anywhere between 6.2% and 11.4% when compared to the previous comps. However, once you have the best units for Nilou teams and are able to focus teams' bountiful core damage on the Hydro characters, Baizhu is the best pick. His own buff, healing, shields, and his own ability to wield the Instructor set allows him to outscale Kaveh in Nilou teams while still acting as quite a safe option. His ability to force his own buff on specific units who you would want to focus on is also a very powerful bonus in the situations that you need it. In the best comp, Baizhu can grant anywhere between a 6.6% to 12.9% bountiful core damage increase when compared to Nilou teams without his buff. So is Baizhu the best unit over the other two? Absolutely, but it comes at the cost of needing the best Nilou comp out there while also managing his own buffs. Is it worth it? In my opinion, not really, especially when compared to Kaveh, who isn't too far behind Baizhu in terms of damage buffing, nor do I believe he is worth it over Yaoyao, who offers some of the best and most versatile means of applying deep wood to enemies or proc the Instructor set herself for everyone to benefit from. In terms of team rotations and not playing perfectly, which is extremely common, both Yaoyao and Kaveh won't be affected in terms of their usefulness and buffing capabilities, while Baizhu will be heavily affected. Messing anything up on Baizhu will result in an increase of bountiful core damage output by 4.4% to 10.9% when compared to previous comps. This is strictly just worse than Kaveh and is also at about the same effectiveness as just putting an Instructor set on your team. Hello everyone, Present Aaron here with an update. This video started before Baizhu released, so after getting and testing Baizhu in Spiral Abyss, I have a few things to note, especially with the comparison between Kaveh and Baizhu. So while Kaveh does perform very well as a stat stick character, he offers almost no flexibility in team rotations. His buff is also good, but it comes at the cost of being applied to everyone on the team. While this does sound good, it does mean that it's going to buff units that don't want a buff most of the time, leading to about half of his entire buff being basically wasted. The fact that he also needs to drive leads to a lower team DPS than I originally calculated in Nilou teams due to Hydro drivers working better. So while Kaveh's buff is team-wide, it's being used sparingly by 2 units. On the other hand, Baizhu's buff is stronger and is best when applied to 1 or 2 teammates. Since he is mostly off-field, his buff allows the Hydro units to stay on-field. This would then let the Hydro characters trigger somewhere around 50% more bountiful cores, which allows them to make more use of Baizhu's buff than Kaveh's. I tested multiple comps in Chamber 1-1 on floor 12 in the Spiral Abyss. These comps being Baizhu or Kaveh paired with Nilou, C2 Nahida and Kokomi, Nilou, Yaoyao and Kokomi, and Nilou, Yaoyao and C6 Candace. And in all of these comps, Baizhu reigned supreme as the better bountiful core buffer as he cleared 18.7% to 26.8% faster than Kaveh. I also found Kaveh to be much clunkier to play and also incredibly squishy. His healing Ascension passive has a cooldown which isn't great, as it meant that a lot of the time, Kaveh would just get blown up by the bountiful cores into one-shot range of the consecrated beasts. You know, like anything below 50,000 HP, because those things are stupidly overpowered and they make me want to put a toothpick under my toenail and kick a wall. On the other hand, there's Baizhu, who feels a lot better. Baizhu counters this aspect by allowing for a crap ton of healing, and with Baizhu, I died noticeably less. With all this in mind, I want to go back a bit to some things I said before. Baizhu is a good unit that can surpass others in terms of team damage output as well as defensive utility. In Nilou teams, he is one of the 3 best supports around in terms of utility and buffing capability, even without Nahida and Kokomi. However, the other 2 are much better than Baizhu and are also much more versatile, even for Nilou teams, where getting them leads to a faster clear time than getting Baizhu. This makes Baizhu seem worse by comparison, though he offers some of the best defensive utility in the game. To me, this is Baizhu's biggest draw, as with him, I consistently died less often than when using another comp that didn't have him. I also want to go back to the point I said before where Kaveh and Yaoyao aren't as impacted as Baizhu is when not played perfectly. While this is sound on paper, in practice, this was completely incorrect, at least on the Kaveh side of things, as Baizhu's ability to move around freely and be used anywhere in a team rotation allows him to be played in a much more versatile way. Kaveh is the opposite, as I found that if something was not set up correctly, or if you had to move away from the setup at all, or if one of the consecrated beasts just so happened to use one of their moves that pushed you across the entire map, his purpose completely diminished due to his strict on-field time. This was especially the case with Kokomi, whose jellyfish stayed in one spot and could not be moved. So if the fight moved to another location, which was especially common while in Kaveh's burst, there was no way to move her Hydro application somewhere else without having to get resources back to do the much more strict rotation all over again. Due to this, I have found that in practice, he has about the same clear time in Nilou teams as Yaoyao does, despite his much more strict rotations, clunk, and lack of sustain. And honestly, that's terrible. That is actually terrible. Obviously, this is just one floor, so it can change in other situations, but yeah, I did find Kaveh to be very underwhelming. Before I pass it back to past Aaron, there is one more thing I want to make note of, and that's my tests with Baizhu in Aggravate and Quick Bloom teams against Yaoyao. In these comps, I had Baizhu using Thrilling Tales and the Instructor set to maximize his buffing potential, while Yaoyao just had a Tenacity set or Deepwood set, depending on if it was specifically Aggravate or if it was Quick Bloom. In these teams, Yaoyao beat out Baizhu by a landslide, despite the extreme amount of buffs that he provides. This is especially the case with Hyper Bloom, which Baizhu can't support too well, and Sino, whose AoEs don't benefit from Baiju's single target application. However, with Yaimiko, the gap they had shrunk to the point where they were pretty much on par with one another in Aggravate situations. Then there's also the difference between Baizhu and Kuki Shinobu, both on the Instructors with Sino, Nahida, and Yulan. In these comps, Sino is wielding the deathmatch with Kuki due to the major battery potential she provides. With Baizhu, however, he has to switch to the Favonius Lance due to the major hit in energy generation the comp gets. When Baizhu has Thrilling Tales and Kuki has the Key of Kashnasut, Baizhu is only slightly behind Kuki in terms of clear time. This is kind of wild, since one would assume Sino would receive a damage loss due to the insane reduction of crit rate he received from the switch in weapons. This might be the case, but the major damage increase from the attack boost, along with the flat reaction bonus for Sino, as well as the extra EM granted to Sino for Hyperblooms and Nahida's damage, leads to about a similar team damage output when compared to Kuki. So, as a final note on my thoughts on Baizhu, in Nilou teams, he is one of her best options as he can provide a good amount of buffs to the team while also keeping the team healthy. In other spots though, I see him as relatively on par with other options available as he generally performs just as well as them. But in spots where he does perform on par or worse, he does offer much more defensive utility than almost any other unit in the game. With him on the team, I had very little issues with dying as he provided enough healing and shielding for my party to tank through everything relatively easily. I cannot say the same about the other three, as there were many situations where I would just get one shot by the Consecrated Beasts because they are stupidly designed with high damaging AoE stun locking combos. I'm not mad, I swear. Anyways, it's time to pass it back to past Aaron. Now, this is normally where I would end the video, but I asked all of you if you had any other specific questions on Baizhu. I've received a decent amount of questions and I plan to answer them as quickly and effectively as possible. Let's start with the rapid fire. First question, is it realistic to max Baiju's HP scaling reaction buff if he's on Instructors? If not, is the damage loss from having less HP made up for with the Instructors team-wide elemental mastery buff? To answer the first question, no. It's practically impossible. When using the Instructor set, the amount of stats that you have to work with is dramatically lower than using a full 5-star set. Due to the lower amount of substats and value of substats available, building full HP to maximize his buff is impossible on Baizhu. His best stat stick outside of his signature weapon, that of which being Prototype Amber, still requires a lot of energy recharge for him in substats, and the issue gets worse the more utility-focused weapons you use with him. This can be remedied quite a lot by using his signature weapon, getting his first constellation, and also having an energy recharge sans. But even then, I still don't think that it's enough. I haven't done the math yet, but I'll put it on screen to see exactly where, or if it's even possible with all those three things combined. And I'll figure out the threshold. For the second question here, I went back and did quite a bit of tests, and I found that generally Instructors is better. Since you get over half of Baiju's buff from just having him available, building more into it is kind of redundant. It's the main reason why energy recharge is much more important, and the same can be said with the Instructor set. While using the Instructor set, the damage increase that you would get from it over just building into full HP is 1.9% at mid investment and 1.6% at high investment in Nilou teams. It's 0.2% better when alone, or 2.5% better with Kazuha in Kuching teams, but actually 1.8% worse when using Nahida with him. Then it's 1.6% better, or 4% with Kazuha while buffing Fischl, and it's 2.7% better, or 14.6% better with Kazuha when buffing Yaimiko. Now, I know that's a dramatic increase for Yaimiko, but that's mainly because the Elemental Mastery acts as a flat damage for Yaimiko, but also gets filtered through Kazuha and her own Ascension passive to grant her a large skill damage percent multiplier. I also put Thrilling Tales on him and use that to help buff her base damage, which is another reason why the damage difference is so dramatic. So yeah, using the Instructor set is better, but while it is better, just remember that you are losing out on the defensive utility that he has by using the Instructor set. This set also has the downside of only being able to be procced when on field. This is counter to how Baizhu is supposed to be played, as his buff can be very annoying to apply to his party if you're not micromanaging. This set encourages even more micromanagement as it requires Baizhu to be on field once every 8 seconds. This can be detrimental as it would be very easy to lose out on Baizhu's buffs just to get the extra elemental mastery. In a lot of situations, losing Baizhu's buff can be just as detrimental as losing the Instructor's buff. Present Aaron here again. Despite what I have just stated, through my testing, I have found no situation in game where it is relatively difficult to proc the Instructor set. He usually focuses on quick swap teams while going into every party member. In these comps, I found it very valuable to swap into him one more time after his skill comes off cooldown for the extra energy generation anyways, so putting the Instructor set on him just pairs really well with this. This would lead to only an 80% uptime on the Instructor set, but that's still better than the 60% uptime on Noblesse. You might think it would be, but this wasn't even that much of an issue with Sino, as I learned to obliterate Nahida's dendro aura with Yu'lon to proc Instructors with Baizhu, and then go into Sino until Yu'lon's elemental burst stopped shooting. That would be the best point in time to reapply the Instructor's buff and restart the rotation. There is much less uptime on it here, but it is still valuable and worth using with Sino. On to the next question, and this one also has two. What is Baizhu's synergy with Tighnari spread? Is he worth it, or are there better supports? Baizhu is pretty good with Tighnari. They both excel more in single target focused quicken teams, and Tighnari can make use of Baizhu's buffs pretty well, especially if Baizhu wields Deepwood Memories, which he definitely can in single target situations. However, he doesn't make as much use of those buffs, unlike Nahida's, who buffs Tighnari better while also coming with some crazy good damage output. The same can be said for Yaoyao, who with the Moon Piercer outperforms Baizhu most of the time while also coming with some better damage and defensive utility. Even without the Moon Piercer, she is about on par with Baizhu when she's at Constellation 1. Onto your next question of, with Baizhu's buff, will it make burning comps more viable? So, burning itself is an incredibly weak reaction that only sees play with Ganyu for her to have a constant pyro aura to melt off of. Its damage per second at base is way too low to perform well, as it only deals about 1200 damage per second with 1000 elemental mastery. Baizhu's buff doesn't help with this, as he can only increase the reaction's damage output to about 1400 damage per second. So no, Baizhu doesn't make burning comps relevant, and I don't think any character can ever actually change that. If we wanted to get burning reaction to deal a good amount of damage, let's just say about equal to that of Hyperbloom, a character would have to come with a damage multiplier of 14,177.2%. Baizhu can only get to 100%, and the closest we have ever seen to this number is a 400% damage buff from Nilou. So I think I can state for a fact that burning will most likely never be a good damaging reaction. And now on to the final question. If you have Nahida, Yaoyao, and Kaveh built, is he a skip? Since my Bloom team uses Kokomi as a healer and my Quicken teams use Yaoyao as a dendro healer, what does he bring to the table that I'm missing? In the grand scheme of things, you're not missing out on much with Baizhu. There are many characters that do what Baizhu does to a similar degree or better. His main use is specifically for Aggravate and Nilou teams, and just a note, in Nilou teams, he's not going to replace Kokomi since she has some of the best Bountiful Core proccing of any unit in the game, while Baizhu has none. So if you're using Baizhu in a Nilou team, use him as the healer and build Kokomi for her Bountiful Core damage output. For both Quicken and Bloom team comps, he can be easily replaced. The damage increase from upgrading Yaoyao to Baizhu is also not enough to warrant getting him. Simply getting Nilou's weapon or C2 or Nahida's C2 will grant a larger damage increase than getting Baizhu. In teams such as Virgin and Hyperbloom, he can act as a decent driver, but you need someone to wield the Deepwood set, and he can only use it in single target situations or when using sacrificial fragments against small clusters of enemies. In these comps, both Yaoyao and Kokomi will be better because they could wield the Deepwood set. For Quicken comps, Yaoyao is one of the best options when supporting another dendro unit. At C1, she offers so much to her main DPS, and she can easily apply dendro to many opponents that she's just going to be the better option overall. There's also Nahida, who can outperform them both in most situations, especially with Al-Haytham. While Baizhu can reach higher peaks in certain situations, again, the damage increase for that unit is generally so small that it doesn't make up for the fact that you're losing damage, since Baiju's is god-awful. So if you skip Baizhu, what exactly are you missing? The main downsides to skipping Baizhu are the loss of a unit that can take the slot of a bunch of other units that specialize in their field to an equal level that Baizhu does, the loss of the only character who can heal the entire team with their elemental skill, the loss of another one of Nilou's best supports, and the loss of a potential teammate or Folklore whenever she's released. But that's really it. If you have the other units, especially Yaoyao, who can replace him in every team comp that he's good in, there's no reason to pick Baizhu over other units other than some minor damage increases for specific teams. But that's it. That took a while to record. This is going to be a long video. Anyways, thank you all for submitting your questions. Thank you all for supporting my channel, and thank you all for helping me make this content. I'm hoping to get this video out before the next patch when Baizhu is actually released, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's all I have to say for today. I hope I helped in some degree. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time when Baizhu actually releases. Bye bye!